Ooh.
Yeah, so hello all, very welcome to this submissions information session uh, for the Stick Apply magazine. Submission round has just opened, and already we've got over 500 submissions in the last couple of days since it opened yesterday morning. There tends to be a kind of rush at the beginning and then a big rush at the end, and it can go quiet for a little while in between, which so we'll talk you through everything. But I'm just going to start by sharing my screen, hopefully, and seeing if I'm ready to go with this. I'm probably not. Just 1 second. Oh, stop share. Stop share. Ignore me. Terrible person. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, so this is what do. There's green. Here we go, our lovely website. And we obviously put out the link for submissions on social media. That's where many of you may have seen it already, or through our newsletter and so on. There'll be an edition of the newsletter going out. I think, well, one went out this morning, another one's going out next week. So you come onto our website, you go to the About Us page, and then you scroll down a bit to the Sting Apply magazine. This is where the submission guidelines are stored on the website. And then while the submission round is open, so you can check this through at any time during the year. It should always tell you when the next submission round is coming up, at least the next one, possibly more. And yeah, and while the submission round is in progress, we'll have a link here that takes you directly to the form on Submittable where you can submit your work. Now, submissions close at 5 p.m. on the 27th of November. There are a few questions to get through on the submittable form, so allow yourself time to do it. You can go, as far as I know, you can log on to Submittable, and so this is the next page you come to, and you will go down here. Are we still seeing all this? So the address, once you have a Submittable account opened up, you get to the submission guidelines fairly quickly. And here we go. So this is the submission form, essentially, a submission title. And we explain underneath each box what we're looking for here. And we try to make everything as clear as possible, because I know people get confused and also are anxious or nervous when they're doing something like this. So yeah, we try to make all of this as smooth for people as possible. And then we ask a series of questions about you and about your work. And then when you're at this question here, it's a drop-down menu of what you're submitting. So this is what we accept from people. And you have to choose, we ask you to choose to submit what you're going to submit for any particular submission round. So, and this is really because of the number of submissions we receive. A way of us managing the numbers is that we ask people that they would only submit one piece of work per submission round. So if you're writing poetry and short stories and essays, we're going to ask you which of those you want to actually submit. In the round. So that's where that goes in. Have you submitted work to the Sting Apply in the past? That's just curiosity on our part, really, in terms of gauging how many new writers are coming along each time. And then again, these are again just to get a sense for ourselves of how many new writers we're reaching, or what is the profile of the writers that we're reaching. And all of the questions kind of relate to that. A biographical note. I've just added this actually now with this submission round, just to say that we typically read this after we've read your work and when we are curious to learn about the author. So we're not going straight to your bio. Don't fret too much about the bio. Just give us what information you have to hand or what you can think of in the moment if you have it, or if you have a prepared bio that you use with other submissions, it's fine to submit to send us that. Again, it's not a big deal by any means. Obviously, the thing that we want you to take the most care with is the work that you're submitting, and so that's where what you should be spending your time on. And if you need the next 2 weeks to finish it off, so be it. Well, not the full 2 weeks, until November 27th is when you need to get it done to us by 5 p.m. Irish time. And then we ask some further questions about yourself and your experiences. And these really, as the notes are here, basically, some of the questions here will be less relevant for international writers submitting to us from outside Ireland. Your answers will inform our ongoing efforts to redress imbalances in Irish writing and publishing and have no bearing on your submission. The information we collect can only be used in an aggregated, anonymized fashion, and no identifiable data will ever be published. All of that is true. And it is the case that we are seriously committed to providing opportunities for writers of all ages and backgrounds. And this short survey is basically designed to help us understand more about the writers we're engaging with, the people who are submitting to us. And if at any point you don't want to answer a question, do just skip it and move to the next one. We're not going to judge anyone on the basis of how much or how little of this information they give us in the submission form. But just going back to the point where these are all questions that are asked, and to allow yourself the time to get the submission in. Now, I know from experience that we get like so many submissions at the very last minute. And even in the last minute, we might get, in the last 30 seconds, we might get 10 submissions from people. And we haven't done a study as to see which of those have answered all our survey questions by any means. So again, it's just not something to worry about, but we are grateful if people take the time to fill in the survey when they're submitting. It helps. It will help us. That's as much as I can say about that. I already feel like I've been talking forever, and that was not my intention by any means. So I'm going to. So we have, again, I don't think I said this before, while we were recording, that two other people here are Lisa McInerney, the magazine's editor, and Annemarie Ní Churreáin, the magazine's poetry editor. And they're here to answer the bulk of your questions tonight. And I'm going to put a few of the questions to them that came in over the last week or so. If that's okay, that's what I'll do now.
Do you want me first, Declan, to go through what happens to the submission when it comes in?
I think that would be great, because that is the first question I was actually looking for. So take it away, Lisa.
Yeah, okay. Because like I noticed with the questions that people were sending in, this was kind of like coming across quite a bit, and people were just curious about the process to get your work into this fabulous beastie here, this lovely thing, this lovely object. So yeah, so basically when you submit work to the Stinging Fly, the first thing that happens to it is, Declan is right, by the way, in terms of like, we don't, immediately start trawling through bios to go, what kind of writers do we want in this spread? That's not it at all. The work speaks for itself, and that's what we're interested in. So the very first thing that happens, it gets assigned to a reader. So we have a bunch of readers. We have a team of people who help us reading all the submissions, and usually we get in and around 1,500, 1,600 submissions in every submission period. And the bulk of those will be short stories. The readers that we have a team of contributing editors who are all, you know, long-term team members and all experienced writers themselves. And then we have a team of kind of readers who rotate in and out, essentially. They would all be from a range of backgrounds. They'd be from an age groups and genders and disciplines that they write in. And they're all experienced writers and editors themselves, which we find important because we want people to trust that, you know, when their work comes in, that it is read by somebody who has a passion for this and who kind of knows what they're doing and all of that. So readers have access. There was a question, I think, in one of the ones that was sent in previously about blind readings. So the readers do have access to the bios and the name of the writer. And as to like the reason behind that is, of course, we like to keep an eye on who's submitting to us. It's not just a case of like every time that somebody submits that it comes in, you know, completely kind of new and that we have no existing relationship with this writer's work or interest in this writer. That's kind of not how we like to do things. We like to know who's writing what, and we like to kind of see how writers are developing throughout the kind of time that they're submitting to us. And often a writer submits maybe multiple times before a piece gets chosen for the magazine. And each time that a piece comes in from that writer that we might have marked as being, you know, very close to being published, you know, it's an exciting thing for us to kind of see what's coming in from people, how their work is developing, how close they are to kind of getting into the magazine. So that's what that is. But again, the reader has access to the submitting writer's name and bio, but they generally don't read those until afterwards, as Declan said, when you want to kind of know a bit more about the writer, where they're coming from, or maybe you want a bit more context. In general, the work will have to stand for itself. You know, there's no point in like somebody writing in their bio that they've won the Nobel Prize. Although if Han Kang is on this call, I'm all ears and very open to that. Or if somebody writes in and says, you know, I've never been published before, is this going to go against me? It doesn't, you know, it doesn't at all. The other thing is when you're reading, you know, hundreds of stories, you don't really have time to be combing through bios. So the readers take that, the readers read their work, they have they then make the kind of like first, I suppose they compile a report really, for me essentially. So they would first off have a look at whether the story is, or the piece that's submitted to us is kind of ready to go. Is it publishable? Great. You know, is it one for us? Brilliant. But there are also other kind of like responses. There could be stories in there that, you know, they just aren't ready yet for whatever, you know, reason. They're not ready to go. They're not of interest to us or whatever. But there's other work too. There's work that's very promising, maybe from an emerging writer, a very new writer who we want to encourage. There's work that we definitely want to long list because we think it could be there. You know, there's work that from a writer that we have a relationship with. There's all these different kind of tiers to it. So it's not just a simple yes or no. So the reader makes recommendations essentially to me about any writer that could be part of the issue, or any writer that could, you know, benefit from having a bit more kind of contact with us. So there's all that. So essentially, I will then read all of these recommended pieces multiple times. I'll make a long list and then a short list. I will pull in the contributing editors if I want any more feedback on the stories, if I want a second opinion, if I want another kind of set of eyes on something. I may go back to the original reader and kind of talk a bit more about what they think the story needs. So all of these things. So the decision in order for a piece to be kind of promoted to a long list or a short list, the decisions will be based on, first off, quality of the work. First and foremost, you know, that's the main thing. Like, is this really good, essentially? Other than that, it would be things like originality. You know, is there anything else that we've earmarked for the issue that's like this? Have we published something like this very, very recently? How would this piece fit in the issue that's kind of like coalescing at this point, that's coming together? And then we do kind of ask, is this piece from a newer writer, an established writer? Is it from someone we haven't worked with before? Or is it from a writer who maybe is from a community that isn't, you know, that's underrepresented in literature, and like, do they need the support? Has everyone essentially been given a fair shake? So that's another thing that would come into play. The other thing is, and I've seen quite a few questions that came in kind of asking about this, the length. So we say a piece is as long as or as short as it needs to be, and that's true. So some of the stories that we've published in recent issues have been, you know, a page and a half long. And then in this most recent issue, I have one story that's 25 pages long. So there really is no kind of benchmark in that sense. There's no kind of thing where we would be going, well, that's, you know, we're dismissing this out of hand because it's too short. We're dismissing this out of hand because it's too long. That's not the case. However, there are practical considerations. So essentially, if you're sending in a story that is, you know, incredibly long, you know, that I think the longest story we've ever published was around 11,000 words. If you're publishing a story that is that long, the question I would ask myself is this good enough to take the spot of 2 to 3 other stories? Because that's essentially the practicalities of it. That's what it is. And sometimes the answer is yes, yes, it is. And which is the case for the kind of the story that we're publishing in this issue. Yes, it absolutely is. And sometimes it's a case that we can't justify the length. So there's that as well. So, sorry. So yeah, I discuss the story. I might get full context, another viewpoint. It'll start coming from a long list into a short list. And from that short list, I really start to see what this is going to look like. I'm going to cough now, hold on. So yeah. And then that's when the difficult kind of decisions and the glorious decisions are made. This is the stuff that we want to have in the issue. And usually we find at this point there's a kind of a magic starts happening. These pieces start speaking to each other in some sort of strange way. And there's no kind of way to kind of quantify that for anybody. It's just how it works out. I mean, you'd often find that people have this, you know, there's a shared concern with writers who are working at the same period of time in history that, you know, things that they are interested in are kind of echoing across. And myself and Annemarie often find that it's really interesting that I will have selected a story and Annemarie will have, you know, independently selected a poem that's in some sort of conversation with it. It's kind of a beautiful thing that happens. The work, anyway, once we decide what we want to do, the writers get contacted and the work is accepted. And then, unfortunately, the piece of the thing that nobody likes to do, the thing that no editor really enjoys, is the rejections have to be sent out. So there was a few questions about tiered rejections and what that means. So we would have a few different types of rejections. So the kind of the basic one, I suppose, and this unfortunately, due to the resources we have, due to the amount of work that we get in, the resources mean, or this means basically that the kind of basic rejection will be kind of sent to most of the work, unfortunately. But when I say basic rejection, like we want that to be, you know, a typical kind of rejection note from us to be grateful, and to be kind of constructive, but brief. We can't offer personalized feedback to everybody, but what we do want to do is acknowledge that without people sending us their work, we wouldn't be able to do the job that we do. We wouldn't be able to put together issues of the Stinging Fly, and we rely on people sharing their creativity and their words with us. And that's very, you know, it's a privilege to get that. And we want to kind of get that across. The other thing is writing is difficult enough, and being a writer is difficult enough. I'm a writer as well as an editor. You don't want at any stage to feel like what's happening is a door slamming in your face. That's not ideal. That's not what it should feel like. It should feel like we are all part of this kind of writing world, and we should be helping each other out, and everything should feel like the start of a conversation. The other thing we're very aware of at the Stinging Fly is that often the very first interaction that a writer has with the literary world or literature or the industry, as it were, is a rejection note, often like from a journal, from a magazine, from a publisher, from an agent, whatever it might be. It shouldn't feel like the end of things. It should feel like the potentially that a conversation is kind of starting. So that's the very first kind of the basic, I suppose, rejection. I don't like the word rejection, but I haven't found a better one yet. We might offer feedback or special encouragement to writers. It might be a case of, oh, this story would be so good if, or, you know, we might have figured out that this writer is submitting like for the first time is submitting to a literary magazine, and their work is really, it's not ready yet, but it will be. You know, there's a lot of promise in it. Those people kind of deserve special encouragement. So we try to kind of single that out as well. For the long list and the short list rejections, and they're the kind of hardest in a way, What we want to do is say that the piece isn't quite right for whatever reason, but please submit again. You know, we really want to read more work from you. Usually we'll say if there's, in the last round, there was about 1,500 stories. Was there about, yeah, it was around 1,500 stories. About 100 made it to that long list, and I think about 35 made it to the short list. And it's one of the questions I'd ask myself if I was a writer submitting at this time, do I want to know how well the story did? I think the majority of writers do, and they appreciate kind of being told this this was really good. You know, this is a fantastic story. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, we can't feature it this time, but we want to kind of keep reading your work. We want to have some sort of relationship with you going forward. Maybe a better opportunity will come along and you're on the right track. You're not doing the wrong thing. Or this story maybe didn't work for us, but it'll certainly work for another editor, you know, that kind of thing. I think it is helpful for a writer to know that this many stories came in and your story was one of the best 35. I think that can hardly, I mean, it's not great news when you get rejected, but that's hardly bad news to kind of know that you've achieved that at least. One of the things that I bear in mind always when I'm doing this kind of work is a writer won't thank a publisher for publishing them too soon. I think this is very, very important to remember. Writers need to have a bit of time to develop their craft and their voice. Sometimes you can spot that a writer, a voice, a piece of work is very good, but not there yet. And there is a kind of like a danger, I think, of thinking, oh, well, you know, maybe I should, there's a kind of a bleeding heart kind of aspect comes into it sometimes, and you think to yourself, well, you know, wouldn't this be nice? I know for myself as a writer, the other side of it, the idea of publishing early work that isn't ready will only do damage in the long run, I think. So it's very, very important that a writer gets time to develop what they're at, develop their craft. So yeah, that's essentially where the rejections kind of come into it, and that's essentially the process that happens when your work is sent to us. Do you think I've covered enough there, Declan, or do you want to come in with a question?
No, I think that's plenty for now, and I'll just ask Annemarie maybe to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the poetry process. I mean, which isn't that dissimilar, but I mean, Annemarie, is it your second issue that you've just finished, or a third?
This is the second issue, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Annemarie Ní Churreáin. I'm the poetry editor only since last year. So feel free, Declan or Lisa, if you need to come in and clarify anything that I say here. My job is to find the best new unpublished poetry. And in that job, I'm assisted by a panel of contributing editors. We welcome submissions by Irish and international poets, and we're committed to having work by new poets in every issue. So I have approximately 30 pages of poetry. It changes from issue to issue. And up until now, I've been running a featured poet slot, which we're currently looking at, and we're going to have an announcement or update on that next year. We read submissions for the poetry twice a year, and there's obviously the windows in May and November. So I think that the last submissions window was around 900 submissions, and each poet can submit up to 3 poems, and it's a lot of care and consideration and really difficult decision making that goes into the journey of sifting all of those submissions down and finding the right poems that sit together in the issue. And what I found so far is that the process of selecting the poems, it's not unlike the journey that you'd go on in terms of writing a poem, in that I might be harboring hopes for what I might see in the submittable folder, or I might have expectations, but once I get into reading the actual submissions, all of that goes out the window, and I'm just encountering every poem on its own terms, and there's always surprises along the way, and you're always meeting the unexpected. And I usually come out of that reading window clutching poems that I never imagined I was going to find. So I suppose my job as a poetry editor is to go in with an open, curious mind. And, you know, I'm on first reading, I'm normally going with my first impressions. How does this
Sorry,
come?
just 1 second, Annemarie. There is a little bit of an issue with your sound. I don't know if you could turn it up a little bit.
Okay, or I might lean a bit closer. Is that better?
Better already, yeah.
Okay. So on first read, I normally try to form a first impression. How does this poem strike me? What resonates? And how long does the poem linger in my mind after I read it? And that first reading, I'm going with my instincts. The second reading of the poem, I tend to go in with a more analytical reading and try to understand, okay, what is this poet trying to achieve? What is the impact of the poem? And how does the poem engage with craft and style and voice and image and technique? And then, you know, my third engagement with the poem, I'm trying to imagine then if it goes on to my shortlist. And out of 900, approximately 150 poems will go onto my shortlist. And then the next stage after that is trying to imagine how the selected poems would speak to each other in an issue and how they would converse. So that's kind of like the four steps that I go on, but each one of those steps is very involved in itself. So I generally select about 150 poems, 100 poems for the shortlist, and these are poems that are by, you know, they're poems that only this poet could have written. They're poems that feel tightly edited. They're finished, or they're very nearly finished and they just need a last tweak. They're poems that I read, that I read and I can't stop thinking about. I can go into that in more detail if we need to in a little bit. But I want to say at this point that some tips if you are thinking of submitting poems to the journal is to read the guidelines, to read the actual magazine itself, but also to find a reader for yourself and your poetry so that you can develop an understanding if the poem is finished and if it's ready to be submitted to the magazine. And also to send your best work. You know, sometimes I worry that poets can get tied up in thinking about, well, is this subject of this poem on trend? Or is the subject of this poem something that this editor is going to relate to? And I think you should put that totally aside and you should look in your poetry folder and send us your best work, regardless of what it's about or what the length. It should be, you know, your top three poems to give your submission the best possible chance. Also to make sure that the poems are spell checked, that you know, there's no wonky grammar. I mean, some of my pet peeves are, you know, the bad spelling, or maybe it's not clear what the layout of the poem is. It looks corrupted on the page. You know, do make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to get those basics right as well. So lastly, I'll just say that you can be sure that everything you send us gets read really closely, often multiple times. And, you know, I know myself from sending out work to magazines, the process of selecting and preparing your work in itself can be really clarifying. And, you know, there's value to just putting that time aside and reflecting yourself on where you're at with your poetry writing and what your best work is. And then it's also important to get your work in front of editors, because I frequently read work that is maybe not ready for the issue, or work that you know, there's not space for it. But I will remember the poet and I remember the work, and I will look to build a conversation with them over time. And to not be daunted as well by rejection, because you're getting your work in front of the editor, you're starting a conversation, and all of that has value. And then it's, you know, one of the magic things about the magazine for me is that the diversity as well of the poets and the voices, and to be an emerging poet and to have your work published alongside somebody who's more established, you know, how wonderful is that? So and also don't worry about the bio and the information that goes into that section of the form. I read the poems first of all, and only at a very later point do I look, you know, at the bio. That doesn't influence my thinking. I want the best poems.
That's great. Thank you, Annemarie. So I will, oh yeah, I just want to, if Lisa, maybe if you can give people an idea of just the numbers of submissions that we receive, if you have them there.
I just have very vague roundabout numbers, but like generally we see across all the submissions at least 2,000 across, like, so like around 1,500 short stories. Annemarie, you get another, it's at least 3,000, sorry.
Yeah, it's
So you
it's
get
around
another
2,000.
1,000 poems, and then there's about essays, you get about 200, 250, so much lower than the short stories, with short stories being our kind of focus anyway. And then novel extracts, we don't get a huge amount of them, usually about 200 as well.
Yeah, and there were a couple of questions on the novel extracts, just relating to whether you should submit a synopsis with the novel extract, which I think is the case. We don't ask for we don't ask for that a synopsis. So we are looking for something that readers will be able to kind of pick up on fairly quickly. It should be kind of self-contained, and that, you know, readers will understand what's happening just by reading it in the magazine, and it's going to be standing on its own there among the other pieces of work. And there was another question from somebody earlier about the rights issue. I mean, there's no impact really. Like, you hold on to the rights of anything you publish in the Sting and Fly magazine. So we ask that that we're the first to publish the work, but then it's up to you. And it's not going to have an impact on, like, if an agent or a publisher sees a good novel extract in the magazine, they're likely to be interested in seeing more. They're very likely to ask to see more, and it's not going to impact on future publication of the full novel in any way. It might. I mean, our intention with this is to help, you know, speed up the process for writers working away on novels and not getting a chance otherwise to kind of submit work, because mostly we publish short stories or poetry, and it's, you know, so it's good to include the novelists who might be working away for over a longer period of time, years in you know, in the darkness without having a chance to submit the work. So that's why we take novel submissions now on each submission round. There are a couple of questions in the chat about previously published and what that means. I mean, I think it essentially means that, like, ideally what we're getting is something that hasn't been published anywhere else at all before. If it has been published in a very small, limited way, and we love the poem or the story, we're going to probably choose in favor of it, and, you know, be flexible in the previously published. I mean, depending on very much on the context. But if it's in another published magazine, well, then that automatically rules it out, and you shouldn't submit it. But if it is in a very small scale publication that has just been privately shared and not professionally in any way published, well, that doesn't rule it out. But I would encourage people to keep, you know, to write more work and submit more work, you know, kind of get the new work to us. I mean, that's what we're here for. So, I mean, you don't write it, whatever number, you know, don't stop writing, keep writing and keep submitting. I mean, that's what we want you to do. It's going to be impossible to follow the chat, I'm afraid. So if now would be a good time if people had burning questions to use the raise hand function, and we'll see you at the top of the list, and that would really help us, and we could come and take your question. Or if raise your hand and write the question in the chat, then at least we know what we're looking for.
Before that happens, Declan,
Yes.
I might go over, because I did see a few people asking about work in translation as well.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Which I kind of want to cover. So some people were asking previously, sending in questions going, do we need to see the original story as well?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
we don't. No, not at all. Do we need a translator's note? No. Although in your bio you could write what drew you to the story if you feel that that's an important context to give. But no, in general, we don't need a translator's note. But we do expect, when work comes in translation, that the translator has spoken with the original author and has, received permission to go ahead and submit the work. So, I mean, the last thing we want is to go, wow, what a fantastic translation, and then realize that there's no contact with the author and nobody knows who has the rights, and that's a nightmare scenario. So that's what we would expect.
And we should address perhaps the question of simultaneous submissions as well, which again is a way of us of just trying to manage the number of submissions we receive, and also deal with the kind of disappointment of missing out on work if we lose it to somebody, another magazine, which has happened. So it really, it puts the pressure back on us to kind of get the submissions read as quickly as possible. So we do promise to get back to people within the 4 months, and that's what, we've been succeeding in doing, to get back to absolutely everybody who submits work to us within the 4 months. So that's the length of time that we're asking for you to give us your work to read and consider. We can't police what you do with the work otherwise, but we are asking that you don't submit it elsewhere. And if you have a story in for competition and you're just waiting for that result to happen, I mean, again, it's me going back to the, please write something else and submit it to us. But so that's just the way it is.
The other side of that too is that we want, with this, what this means too, from the point of view of the writer, is that you get to be deliberate about where you're sending your, and you're not, sending it out willy-nilly to absolutely every journal, that you've thought about who you want to work with, where you want it to be published, where it fits, all this thing. So I think it gives the writer a chance to kind of slow down almost and be a bit more deliberate about what they want to do with their work, as well as everything that the practicalities that Declan has pointed out.
So I'll go to these questions now that are coming in with hands raised from, first of all, Priyanka. Oh no, sorry, I think FFK.
Yes,
were you there
sorry.
First? You were there
first.
first.
I threw my hand up first.
Yeah.
There's 2 quick questions. One was in the chat, and the other one I'm not sure. I sent in advance. I'm not sure if you would have had the time to respond to it. The first one was, I'd just love to hear more about your developmental editing process, especially for fiction. To what extent are you involved in developing a work that you absolutely love, you want to publish it, but just sort of, what are the sort of suggestions? Are they minor?
Yeah.
And so on. And then the second question was, if you happen to have an idea of the percentage of voices that are established, more well-known writers versus the unsolicited submissions by emerging writers, how that works out for each issue or just in general. Thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I'll try to remember both. So I'll have a habit of answering the first question and I won't remember the second one. But so yeah, in terms of the editing process, it really kind of depends. It depends on the story. So if there is a story that, we decide this is fantastic, we want to publish it, we're very excited about this. Often what we're reacting to is the originality of the work and the kind of specificity of the author's voice. Sometimes it's a case of the story is extremely polished, the author is a really sure hand, they know exactly what they wanted to do and they achieved it. But sometimes it's a case of, this is super exciting, but it does need a little bit of work. There's a little bit of tweaking that needs to be done there. So there is a kind of a spectrum of how you'd approach an edit. The first thing that I would do usually is that I would have that initial conversation with the writer to kind of say, well, what did you want to achieve with this? And do you feel that you've achieved it? That's essentially what it is. What concerns do you have about the piece? What do you think it needs, if anything? And sometimes that's a conversation that's over and done like that, but sometimes it's a little bit more involved. And then you might go on to, you know, there might be a restructuring needed, there might be kind of something needs to be done with a character. These kind of broader questions about the story, fixing a voice, fixing maybe the narrative voice that it's in, and experimenting with it a bit. And like the thing is, if the story, you know, we are obviously trying in the space of maybe 6 weeks to get that story ready for publication. If the story was fantastic and it wasn't ready, you know, there are other issues. There's going to be more. The Stinging Fly comes out twice a year, you know, we've plenty of time to work with people. The next thing that would happen then, once we were kind of, myself and the writer are both fairly happy with the shape of the story and where it is that it would go to a line edit, which for me is a very pedantic and pernickety person. I absolutely love it. And that's where you're going in sentence by sentence by sentence to kind of make sure that the engine of each of those sentences kind of works and it's driving things forward. And there's, you know, it's that lovely kind of forensic tweaking of a story. So what I would do then is I would send my suggestions back to the writer. One of the things that I would say to each writer as well is that, like, they are suggestions. It's their work and it remains their work. And so often when you have that second set of eyes on the story, pointing out things that maybe you didn't see yourself as a writer, or maybe like pointing out perhaps solutions, maybe that springboards into something else, some other possibility. So it should feel like a two-way conversation in that sense. It's not kind of prescriptive. It's not me taking over. What happens with an editor, or a good editor, in my personal philosophy, is like you become an advocate for the story, a second advocate. You kind of get between the writer and the story, and you start arguing on behalf of the story to the writer, which is it's a really fun process, actually. I love doing it, but you know, that's how I would see the editorial role. What happens after that, you know, and that we could do rounds of this, you know, because sometimes when you tweak a particular paragraph, something else falls out of line somewhere else, you know. So you could do rounds of this. After that, we have a professional proofreader who makes sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and we haven't misspelled anything horrific. And then we typeset it and we make sure that the writer is delighted with how it looks, and we publish it. So yeah, it's a fun process, but it can take a bit of time, and it can take no time at all. Yeah.
So thanks, Lisa. I'm gonna ask you to stop now, and I'll get Annemarie to answer that question in terms of poetry, and then I'll come back to the second question, part of the question. And Annemarie, you might address the second part of the question as well in terms of the new and more experienced writers and putting that mix into each issue as well, and how you handle that.
Yeah, it's something that I've really enjoyed about the magazine since joining the editorial team last year, is that there is that conversation between the editors and the contributors. And I suppose I'm there as much as the poet needs me. Once I've made my shortlist, or once I've made the selection, some poems or some poets will need just an email to clear up some, you know, small clarifications or to go over proofing or line breaks. Other poets may need a more involved input, and there might be several conversations, or there might be a Zoom to discuss the piece of writing. I mean, really, it's a very pro writer or pro poet process, in that, you know, my job is to work with the poet to make sure that this is their best work, that they've got it to a place where it's really complete, and that they're 100% happy with how it's taken shape. And I really enjoy that process, and mostly poets want to talk about their work, and they want to have a discussion. So it's a two-way thing that works really well. The second part of that question was around the balance between poets who are established and I mean, I've only been involved with 2 issues yet, but it's been really lovely to publish. I think the last issue we have a poem, and it's somebody's first published poem, and in the same issue we have poets who have, you know, 9 collections of poetry, and to see both those poets in one issue and how those poems you know, sit in conversation with each other is really magic. So I'm really interested in, including both in space and having new poets, new voices, emerging poets, and then also having space there for people who have had a long practice and widely published. So
yeah, and I mean the clue, so we call ourselves Single Fly New Writers, New Writing, and so we very much kind of try to engender that in each issue, so that there will be new writers in each issue and new writing from writers in each issue, and then we've started in the last couple of issues or I think maybe the last 3, is it, where we
2 or 3,
that we make a note of who is being published for the first time in print in the issue, and then who is appearing in the magazine for the first time, and that would be a range of and then there might be crossover in both in some cases, but yeah, so we do monitor that ourselves, and it's something we very much want to, we want to have the new writers come through all the time, but it really helps, I suppose, the magazine, and it also helps those new writers if their work is appearing alongside the more experienced writers as well. I thought that was those were a couple of really good questions and required the longer answers that we got there, but I'm aware of at least 5 hands being raised here, so I'm going to try and get to I'm going to take Priyanka and Patricia's story or questions next, and then no, we're just going to publish your stories. It's fine. We're going to Priyanka and Patricia, and I'll take your questions and hope that your questions are going to be answerable by our team of experts here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for organizing this. It's really helpful and really good to know that there's a forensic type edit. I've worked as a journalist. I'm trying to move into creative nonfiction, but continuing still with the journalistic lens of reportage, but writing it more like a creative nonfiction. So I'm just wondering what's the space for that, because a lot of those stories previously, as we publish in other spaces, there is quite a bit of back and forth with the editor because they're complete, but because it's kind of journalistic, like a reportage, there is a bit more like blind spots of things missing and all of it. So I'm just wondering, do you have space for that? And how do you go about those kind of writing? And Annemarie, your voice is very, very low whenever you're speaking. So just like I'll point that out. But thanks so much for this.
Thanks, Priyanka. And I will take Patricia's as well, and give.
Okay, thank you. Mine is related to the difference between non-fiction, creative non-fiction, and fiction.
Great. It's as if we lined you up.
Sorry?
It's as if it was lined up. Great. Go.
I started off with the intention of writing a short story around something that was quite complex and I was trying to work out. And when I'd finished it, it was in third person and it was stilted, and I thought writing it in first person might do the job, and I was happier then. But somebody that read it for me thought it was more creative nonfiction. But of course it is, because the whole exercise is in digging into yourself, and so my intention, maybe you mentioned, Lisa, that was a helpful idea about what was your intention, because in this particular case I had a lot of difficulty working out what is it I want to say. And at the end of it, there was a lot of things connected with what's going on in my life, but then it would be anyway in a piece of writing usually. So for the purposes of applying to the stinging fly, if one entered it, I mean, I'm today, and I could change tomorrow. I'm thinking, yes, this is a piece of straightforward, it's a short story. But if I entered it in the wrong one, would you put it into the? I mean, would that knock you out if you made that mistake?
No, I don't think so at all, Patricia. I think the thing with that is, again, it's about intention. If you submitted it as an essay, then it will be read by our nonfiction editor, Roisin Kybert, as an essay. So she will read it as something that is real, that has happened to you. And then she will kind of make her decision and her edits based around that. So that could be like, in terms of like pulling out, extending on certain parts of what you're trying to say, or it could be like shortening other things based on the kind of the thoughts of that. It's a bit looser with short stories. We'll read it as a piece of fiction, we won't be kind of looking at it and trying to kind of accept any veracity of it. The other thing is, like in terms of Priyanka's question too, there is space essentially for a creative kind of, I mean, that's what we prefer. We don't really want to be public. We're not a newspaper. So like, we're not publishing journalistic style, you know, very staid, very kind of somber kind of pieces of reportage. What we're interested in is writers, and we're interested in your talent and your voice and your outlook, and where you kind of meet the facts of what you're trying to say, your particular kind of slant on it. That's what we'd be interested in. So there's absolutely space. And I wouldn't worry too much about definitions in general. I wouldn't worry too much about like categorizing it. Because we've published things that are, you know, very clearly pieces of nonfiction. We've published pieces that are autofiction. So there's a kind of a blurring of the boundaries. We publish obviously fiction all the time. And the main thing is the outlook, the writer, their own craft, what they're trying to do. That's the main thing.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank
In
you.
the last year or so, I could, or a couple of years, I could point to a piece of writing that we published, which was published in the magazine as an essay, and then became a story in a collection of stories when that book was published. So, you know, and then that was the author's choice each time. They submitted an essay to the editor. I think it was Danny at the time, was it? I think. But and then you know, when they were working with the editor on their book of stories, they decided, well, actually, you know, I'm going to call this a story now, and it fits in along with the other stories that I've written. So, you know, it's not too different from my fiction. So, I mean, it sits comfortably there. But that is the author making the choice in each case.
Yeah.
And that's what we encourage the writers to do.
Thank you.
So I'm going to come to Rosie next, if that's okay, and then Saba is next as well.
Just a very quick question to Annemarie, which is, she was saying she liked poems, and in the final sort of cut, she looked at ones that talk to each other. So I'm sort of worried about that there should be a theme, and if there's a theme, but that might be, it just happens, and so you're just lucky or unlucky as to whether you get the theme.
There isn't a fixed theme, and I'd be hard pushed to say that there was a theme to the last issue, but you will begin to notice poems that are going to sit well alongside each other. And that's why I say it's not unlike writing a poem itself, in that you have to go into that. I go into the journey just expecting the unexpected, you know. And for example, like on my short list, if I have 4 or 5 poems that are all on the same subject, then I might decide that actually I need 1 poem on this subject. You know, I don't, you know, so you start to apply certain criteria at a later point. You know, I might ask myself, well, are 5 poems on the same subject going to sit well together in this issue? Is that the best possible use of the space? Or is it better that I have 1 poem on this subject that is talking in, you know, across space to something completely different? So it's not a fixed theme, but it's more like a picture begins to emerge, you know. And it's difficult to describe at this point, like, what does that picture look like? All I can say is that there's fluidity in it, you know, and I'm not looking for something very rigid. I'm not looking to you know, something that's really fixed, that's really strict, but more to just ensure that an atmosphere builds between poems that sit together. So I know that maybe sounds very vague, but it's nothing to worry about. You know, if the poem is a poem I really love, I'll fit it into my picture, you know, as it emerges. Like it might be an otherworldly picture, you know, it might be a really creaturely picture. It's not a theme per se, but it's just a way of me you know, think how they all slot together.
So you just want to get something that when you got your 40 odd pages together, then they flow and they fit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, is it going to work if they're all short poems? You know, probably not. The picture might have, you know, a mixture of longer poems and shorter poems in it. So yes, it's to get a flow to get some kind of flow and some kind of synergy between the pieces.
And I think it's probably correct to say that at this point in the final round of selections, we are starting to think more and more of the magazine readers and what their experience of the issue is going to be, and we're kind of trying to curate something that feels whole and exciting to them, but also representative of all the submissions that we've been receiving, you know, as well. So and that's, you know, that's the challenge that we set ourselves, I suppose, and embrace. Saba, I'm going to go to you now.
Thanks, evening team. My question was, I was just wondering if you try to balance the different types of submissions that you get, just considering you get less, like say essays compared to short stories. Do you try to make sure that there is a balance, or is it literally just like vibes based?
I say the last line again there, Saba. Sorry. Is there, you're saying, are we trying to create a balance, or I just missed the last thing you said?
Or is it very much like based on vibes? Like, oh, I like
vibes
these.
based.
Yeah.
Are you speaking my language? No, so like we are kind of our primary focus is on the short story. It always kind of has been, but we do obviously we want to reflect across every type of writing that writers are interested in and are engaged in, every kind of type of format and every. But in general, I mean, obviously, if we're going to get, you know, 1,600 short stories and 300 essays, then there is obviously going to be more short stories in the magazine, because that's primarily what people are writing and what people are sending in, essentially. And again, it's not, just to bring back to what Annemarie was saying too, I mean, a lot of it is vibes based. A lot of it is like, it's not like some sort of wonderful checklist where we can go, okay, I want an essay about this particular topic, and I want a story about this particular concern. That's not it at all. A lot of it comes down to how things fit together, the flow of it, as Declan was saying, the kind of the end experience for the reader, all of these things. In general, and I saw somebody else asking this question, I think either submitted before or in the chat. And this is very, very loose, but in general, Annemarie just pointed out she'd have 30 pages of poetry to play with usually, around about. I usually see there being maybe about 12, 13 short stories in general, and maybe about 5 essays just in general. And there might be a novel extract, there might not be, you know, because that is, I suppose, the least representative piece that comes in. It kind of depends really. And sometimes things work in both of those spaces, which I think is quite interesting. Yeah, I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Saba. Lobna, hello. Are you still there, and do you have a question? And then Carolyn is the other question. Or Lobna maybe. Oh, hello?
Yes.
Yeah,
sorry, I was muted. Yeah, just 2 quick questions. This has all been very helpful. The first is, do you keep a database of those who have submitted work before or not? Just curious to know. And the second is, so Lisa, you walked us through how some writers will receive feedback. Just curious if that happens with the poets as well, Annemarie. Do you maybe reach out to those who've reached the shortlist, provide some feedback, or let them know they're on the shortlist? Thanks. Yeah.
I can answer the database one very quickly. We don't keep databases because you can't keep databases of writers really. But what we do is we remember. And I know that sounds kind of very vague, but you remember. Like if you have spent time reading somebody's work, making a connection with whatever they have brought to the table, and you've been impressed by it and you love it, then you're not going to forget it, and you don't. And I find myself, when this submissions come in, I will be going through each of those names that have come in this big submittable list, and I will be hand-picking the ones that I am desperate to read. This is how it happens. But Annemarie, I'll pass the next part over to you.
Yeah, I definitely keep a log, both mentally and just a simple Excel document of poems of poets that I love their work, but for one reason or another they didn't appear in the issue the last time. Maybe the poem wasn't ready, or it wasn't a fit for the picture. But when they resubmit, or when they send in work again, I'm really hungry and I'm keen to read them again. And when I send out rejections, I generally try as much as possible to tell the people on the shortlist, you know, what it is I liked about their work, and to encourage them to resubmit. And it's one of the things that I didn't realize until I was in this position, but the editor will remember your work. Even if it didn't, you know, if it wasn't successful the last time, you're on their radar and they're interested in you. And it is very pro writer, pro poet, in that, you know, I'm dying to see what this person writes next and hoping that it's going to be a fit for the magazine. So try to be as communicative as possible.
Thank you, Lopna, for the question. And Carolyn, your hand is raised and we've come to you finally.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for staying on later to answer my question. I will try and keep it very brief. I noticed some people asked this in the chat as well. So it's just one of the questions in the actual submittable, the question that's around, have you published any creative writing up until now?
Yeah.
If you have journalism experience, so you have published writing, but you are new to lit fiction, you're new to poetry, you're new to creative nonfiction, would the best thing to select is no, I have not published any creative writing? Or should you say, yes, I've been published, because you have done pieces that are out there, they're just not, traditionally in the creative realm?
It doesn't, like, it's not going to matter too much, but I mean, so
okay.
it's, you could strictly say that you haven't published any creative writing and then tell us in your bio that you've worked as a journalist, or and published pieces like that, or like, we're not going to fact check anything that's there, basically, so it doesn't matter. So, and it'll it's so important that to remember that it is just a piece of work that we'll be reading and focusing on, and it's only after we've read that we go back and kind of go, well, oh, who is this person? But we, even then, we're not going to use that bio when we publish you. We'll be asking you to submit a bio note after we've accepted your work, because circumstances will change or whatever. So we'll be asking for your up-to-date bio. And at that point as well, we can counsel you as to, how best to present the bio. If you have a question on that, we're happy to answer that, help with those things as well. So yeah, it's of no consequence what you say in that form, really. I mean, it really.
Okay, great. Yeah. Just curious if that changes anything in terms of, if a writer gets considered, new or emerging versus established.
No, not really. No. Yeah. I mean, like, we do like to have people who are being published for the first time in the magazine, if it's their first published story, their first published poem. Actually, it came up in the office today that we were looking at a particular back issue, and it was the issue that Annemarie had published her very first poem in. As an adult, actually, I think it was the note. She'd been
I spent the whole time just sniffing that issue and just stroking it and just walking around proudly with it.
But so yeah, it doesn't matter.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone have a final question they want to lob at us, or has anyone want to bring up anything that was in the chat that we've just missed? Or Owen, have you seen anything, or is there anything, Annemarie or Lisa, that you want to add at the last minute? Or there we have a question from Monica.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, yes, thank you. Greetings from Montreal. I just have a very quick question on the nonfiction or creative fiction. Are there topics that are off the table, as far as just areas that you feel like other journals deal with this, we're not tackling it? Or is it really just kind of quite open? That open?
I think it's very open. I mean, if you wrote in a piece proclaiming your love for Donald Trump, it probably wouldn't go down too well with me personally.
Don't worry. Yes.
But the chances of a creative writer tackling such an issue are fairly slim.
Yeah.
No, jokes aside, no, again, the whole thing for us is like that the writer's personality, the writer's passion, the writer's take on something, the writer's talent is the thing that comes across. And we, you know, the range of stuff that has come up in creative nonfiction has been absolutely fascinating. It's a source of endless kind of pleasure in the sense of you get people writing very personal essays about themselves or their families. And then, you know, in the latest issue, we have a piece about family that is told through with a kind of a parallel narrative about Garfield phones, like handsets, phones based on the character Garfield that washed up on a beach in France. You know, so there's a spectrum. There isn't anything, I think, one thing that just tangentially, one thing that we would find or has happened before is that if somebody has written in with a particular nonfiction piece that we feel is extremely personal, we would actually counsel the writer and make sure that the writer is happy to publish it. Because often we've written something kind of very, very, very personal again, and we don't necessarily always follow that through to thinking that it's going to be published. And so there is a conversation that might need to be had with a writer at that particular time to kind of say, you know, are you happy with this? Are you happy with how you've represented yourself? Are you happy with the idea that people will read this? People you know will read this. And sometimes, you know, we find that we tweak something here and it makes it more comfortable for the writer. Sometimes the writer is very kind of like, yes, I have thought about this. But that's a duty of care that would come into nonfiction that wouldn't necessarily come into fiction. But again, it's very, very personal and that kind of thing.
And just relating to that, we have published a piece anonymously as a result of that kind of conversation.
Wow.
Yeah,
Can I just say one quick thing? I am so impressed and grateful for that level of care and sensitivity that is coming across this entire session. So just for that, this has been such a successful session for me.
Thank you, Monica. That's lovely.
Thank you very much, Monica. Mark has his hand up, and so is Sharona. So or Sharona.
Hello, greetings from London. Yes, it's another question about the non-fiction, and I guess it's to do with the what I think is that a lot of the blurring between fiction and non-fiction, and I come from a documentary film background, but I've always thought that you know, documentary is very close to fiction. You have to construct something. As soon as you frame something, you're constructing it. So this, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, for me has not been that important. I just don't work with actors as such, although people are performing. So you see what I mean? And so my writing is based on experience, but I work very hard and I edit again and again and again. So it is very polished, and I could submit it as a story, but it's not just a story because it's actually based on a real experience. But so I don't know how that's defined and whether that matters or not.
Yeah, I mean it's a hard one to answer, Mark, because it would again depend on your intent and how you want it to be read. So there is kind of like a signaling to the reader when you categorize something as fiction or non-fiction. And the reader does kind of come to it, whether it's a reader like an editor or, you know, your general reader, they do come to it with different kind of expectations, even if they're kind of subconscious about what way that they should read this particular piece. And I think that's maybe something to keep in mind just from yourself. But from our point of view, I mean, I'm happy with the blurring of those boundaries anyway. I think that it's a handy thing for the reader to kind of be told essentially on that level, this is fiction, this is non-fiction. But in terms of what the work does and in terms of like how you are reflected in it and how happy you are with it, I mean, then the category doesn't really matter in that sense in terms of the quality of the work. And I know that's a kind of a vague answer, but that a lot of this is kind of like on that level of kind of feeling your way through it and deciding how you want it to be received, you know? I mean, it's not a case of our nonfiction editor would read this and go, well, this feels far too fictional for me. I am rejecting it. You know, it wouldn't work like that, you know. So that we read everything with an extremely open mind in that sense, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the point where I might get myself or all of us into trouble. But
desist.
Well, just by saying, Mark, if it doesn't actually matter to you whether it's and you've a sense that it is non-fiction, but I mean, but it could be read as fiction, but that doesn't actually matter to you. But like the best advice for you in that case would be to send it in as creative non-fiction.
Okay.
Because it will be read in a much smaller pool of work, and will get the intention of the non-fiction editor, who will decide and kind of rate it among those other non-fiction pieces that she's reading. But she is reading, you know, dramatically fewer pieces of work than the fiction editor has to keep eyes on.
That is such practical advice, Declan.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we need.
Yeah. So, Sharona, I'm not sure of your name, but here we go. Hello, how are you?
Yes, Sharona, like the Knack song. Yeah, my question is related to whether the piece has been submitted elsewhere, the submitted piece. So my short story is part of a full collection that in the new year I will have plans to submit to some independent book presses. Would that be considered the story that I will? No, okay.
Not at all.
No, absolutely. That's, you know, absolutely fire it into us. Now is a really good time to send it to us, because then you'll have a response on this story by the end of March. And then
that's great to know.
You know, yeah. So in terms of submitting it elsewhere as part of a publication, you'll either have a publication credit or you won't.
Okay.
an extra.
I hope it's the former.
Credit. Hopefully you will.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I think we're coming to the, well, we're certainly over time. I hope everyone has learned a lot. Thanks for those of you who've stuck around. Big thanks to I am winding things down here. Big thanks to Owen for organizing this, and to Annemarie and to Lisa for answering all these questions tonight and giving it so much information. And yeah, thanks to all of you for your interest in the magazine, and do submit, get the work into us by 5 p.m. Irish time on November 27th. And we'll be taking submissions again in May, but watch out soon for an announcement on that particular submission round coming soon. But that's it.